despite people seem to strangely think after hearing me talk about coding for an hour. I'm not a recruiter. I was a software engineer worked at Microsoft, Apple, and Google. And most recently was at Google for about 3 years. And when I was there, I did a ton of interviews, about 150 interviews when I was there. But I also served on Google's hiring committee, which the way Google makes decisions is the interviewers don't actually make decisions. They just write up feedback about how you did, and then it goes on to a hiring committee who reviews all the packets. And so I reviewed a few thousand interview packets through the hiring committee and kind of decided who got offers and who didn't. But I also found a company called Career Cup, which is, if you guys don't know it, it's sort of a forum for interview questions, has around 5,000 or so software engineering questions, as well as some PM and testing questions. And there were 2 books. One is Cracking the Coding Interview, which is sort of the interview prep guide specifically for software engineering positions. And the Google resume is a bit different book. It's more of a comprehensive, full titles like How to Get a Job and Plan a Career at Google, Apple, Microsoft, or any great tech company. Something long that I still haven't remembered. But it's basically sort of a comprehensive guide about what you should be doing in college, what you should be doing afterwards, how do you negotiate an offer, how do you write a good cover letter, resume, all this sort of stuff, specifically guided at tech companies. Also want to add, for those who have their laptops up, and I'm going to go through some of this stuff fairly quickly because my slides are online, so you don't need to take too vicious notes. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go back to that slide. I'm going to talk about sort of the process, what are they looking for, how do you apply, how do you write a good resume. I'm going to talk a bit about sort of the soft skills behavioral stuff. But most of the talk, or at least like half the talk, is going to be spent on sort of the technical skills part. And I think it's roughly half and half, so if you're sitting here in the first half thinking this is too fluffy, it won't be for long. Okay, so if at any point you have questions, just feel free to raise your hand and I'll stop and answer them. Okay, so if you talk to recruiters, sometimes they will tell you something a little bit differently. But what I've seen firsthand is that what big companies are really fundamentally evaluating you on is coding what they call analytical skills, which is essentially intelligence. Behavioral stuff, your experience helps you get an interview. Your personality can get you rejected, mainly if you're arrogant, which happens. I've seen that happen with a bunch of people who, always men, strangely, but I've seen it happen with a bunch of guys who are a little arrogant and kind of their interviewers are looking at them and like, I don't want to work with this person. But generally speaking, it's about coding intelligence. The thing with this is, though, they're testing aptitude and not knowledge, and you'll see this come in later on in the talk. This is generally for big companies. So, and by big companies, I mean like Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, that sort of company. They're not testing as much the ins and outs of your knowledge on a particular language or programming methodology. It happens, but it's rarer. Startups are much, much more variable. They tend to want to see if you can hit the ground running. So do you know their current technologies? Not all require this, but many do. They want to see entrepreneurial signs. So what have you started? What have you, even if it's not a software company, have you started a club? Have you done something that shows that you're entrepreneurial, that you're the person who's willing to kind of do something a little bit different, put yourself out there? And then they also look more at personality, so will you fit in with the team? And this is in addition to sort of what I talked about with big companies. So big companies are much more like coding intelligence, and startups look for generally a broader package. But it's very, very variable. There's a ton of startups out there, and everybody has their own views on what's important. So for PMs and APM positions, there's and this is really valuable to understand what they're looking for, because that comes into play with how to answer questions. So communication skills are huge. So can you communicate in a structured fashion? They want to see that you're the kind of person who thinks about things from the user's perspective, not from your own perspective. So if you're designing like a key fob, like a key clicker for a car, do you think about what you want, or do you think about the fact that this is actually designed for a teenager, or it's actually designed for an older person? They want to see a passion for technology. They want to see that you're really excited about technology, that you care about what's going on with tech. And then, as well as, just like the coding software engineering interviews, they want to see analytical skills and technical skills. Typically, the bar for technical skills is a little bit lower, than it is for a software engineering position, but it's still important. So the other thing that's important to know is, this is something that a lot of people don't really understand, but the way that you're judged is relative to other people ask the same question. Meaning that if I ask you, I ask Bob a question, and then I ask Alex a question, and then I ask them different questions, and Alex makes 5 mistakes, not that you can judge it purely on mistakes, but if Alex makes 5 mistakes, or Alex takes 5 minutes to answer the question, Bob takes 10 minutes to answer a different question, that's like you guys took 2 different tests, and one person got a 50, one person got a 70. Well, what was the average, right? Like I don't know anything about how you did unless I've seen other people ask the same question. And so when you're thinking at the end of the interview that you made all these mistakes, you struggled, whatever, it doesn't mean anything, because you don't know how much you struggled relative to other people. And that's what this is all about. How did you struggle? How much did you struggle relative to other people? How optimal was your algorithm relative to what other people got? How many mistakes did you make relative to other people? So when you're walking out of your interview and you think you just bombed it, I've seen this over and over and over again. I talked to a ton of candidates, and there is no correlation. And these are like friends I've seen at Google where I'd refer them to Google, and then I ask them how they did, and then I talk to the recruiter and actually look at their interview feedback, which the recruiter probably shouldn't have showed me, but they did. And there's no correlation between how someone thinks they did and how they actually did. Really, seriously, no correlation. I had my office mate who ended up working at Google, thought that he had completely bombed one of the interviews with this guy, Scott, who's also on our team. And it was my office mate is Sean, and Scott was the interviewer. Sean was like, oh, I thought I did terribly with Scott. And Scott's like, no, Sean was the best candidate I've ever seen. And the reason there's no correlation is that you're judged completely relative to other people, and you don't know how other people did on the same question. And then the other reason why there's no correlation is that you're judging it probably based on how the interviewer reacts to you. But I'm no nicer to somebody who's doing well on the question than someone who's doing poorly. In fact, if someone's probably totally bombing the interview, I'm probably going to be actually really nice to them because, they're not getting an offer anyway. I might as well just chill the rest of the time. I don't need to push them, right? There's really, the interviewer's feedback how the interviewer reacts to them, is really about their personalities, not your performance. So, walk out of the interview, think you bombed, don't worry about that thought. You're going to analyze anyway, but it doesn't mean anything. So just remember that. It's not about how quickly you solve the problems, how quickly you did it relative to other people. Okay. So I'm going to go into sort of how to design a good resume, which I would say 90% of people get wrong in pretty fundamental ways. And also how to get an interview. The big thing is, if you're thinking about how to, particularly if you're younger, your first year or second year, the biggest thing if you want to get an interview down the road at these big companies, or any company for that matter, build something. You should have a couple projects on your resume anyway. Spend a couple weekends just building something. I don't know if your schools offer this, but take independent studies, take the class with the big projects, get involved with open source. It doesn't really matter ultimately that much how you do it, just spend some time building something and showing that you can code. And whatever you do, if you don't get an internship, a coding internship, spend your summer building something. Don't just sit there and be a waiter at a restaurant all summer. That's fine if you need to make money, but spend your time actually building something as well. The other part of getting an interview is actually designing a resume that shows off your skills. And honestly, it's really not that hard, but people are terrible at it, particularly engineers. So let me tell you what happens when we review resumes. First of all, we have this giant stack of resumes. This is particularly true at career fairs where you have a ton, but anyway, you still have a giant stack of resumes. We pull them out, we basically spot check. We pick it up, we look at company names, school names, your projects. It's a very, very quick thing. And then we sort of skim the bullets to see what kind of things you built, how you had an impact. And then we kind of make a snap decision of interview or reject, and we go on to the next one. And all this happens in 30 seconds is actually probably a little generous. It's very, very, very quick decisions. And that's why you can't have lengthy resumes. It's because people aren't reading your whole resume anyway. It needs to be very, very short. So this is roughly what a CS resume should look like. So first thing, 1 page only. If you have more than about 10 years of experience, you can, and this is, by the way, a thing when you're applying to US companies based in the US or US positions. People in India, I don't know what Canada's standards are, but I expect they're like the US. Indian positions, European positions have somewhat different standards on lengths. But anyway, one-page resume only. And the reason, again, is that you have 15 or 20 seconds. You're not reading 2 pages anyway. If you expand onto 2 pages, you're just adding like less good content to fill up the next page. So keep it to 1 page. Next thing is use a real resume format. So if you're pulling up Microsoft Word and hitting like Control B and then you type the company name, next line, you're wasting a ton of space and you're creating something that looks kind of sloppy. So use an actual resume template. And mine is online at, I don't know, probably my blog or Career Cup, somewhere online. Actually, it's on the googleresume.com. That's where it is. So you can download this. Next thing, short 1 to 2 line bullets. Again, this is because we spot check and we don't read everything. Anything that looks like a paragraph probably won't get read. So 1 to 2 line bullets. Big thing that a lot of people mess up on is focus on accomplishments, not your responsibilities. So words like worked on, helped with, like, you didn't really do much. Like, that doesn't tell me anything about what you did. I want to see that you've implemented something, you built something, you created something, you've optimized something. So focus on your impact. Next thing is your GPA. Based on a 4.0 standard, the good rule of thumb is listed if your GPA is above a 3.0. 3.0 or above, otherwise probably leave it off. You can list either your in major or your overall GPA. So list whichever one's higher, obviously. Obviously in major you need to specify that's in major. Yes, so when I say 3.0 I mean out of 4. If your school works on a different GPA system, a lot of people won't understand. Consider where you're applying. Right? If you're applying to companies which are going to understand a 10.0 system or whatever system you work on, that may be fine. But within the US, a lot of people will not understand. And most of the big tech companies are in the US. A lot of people won't understand anything other than a 4.0 system. So either translate it to 4.0 or list it in some other way, like class rank, percentage, percentile in your class, whatever it is. Quantify it in some other way if we're not going to understand the system your school uses.
Let's say you already have an undergrad student.
If you're a master's student or PhD?
No, let's say you already have a university education, now you're completing something.
Yeah, I would still, if your GPA, a GPA is like, it doesn't have to be on its own bullet, right? It's like 3 extra characters at the end of the line that says what your major was. So yeah, if it helps you, list it. If you have a good GPA, it's not going to hurt you to list it. By the way, if I say computer science, in the US, computer science and software engineering are, there aren't really software engineering degrees in the US, it's all computer science. So I kind of use them synonymously. Next thing is 3 to 4 projects is a pretty good number to list on your resume. Anything goes here, right? If it's for a course, if it's independent, if it's something you did for fun, if it's an open source thing, if it's finished, if it's not finished, if you've never launched it, if you're still working on it, doesn't matter. If you've coded it, it matters. And then you have a short list of technical skills. Generally speaking, in fact, I would probably say this too for any job, nobody cares that you know how to use Microsoft Office. First of all, when people say that, it's like they know how to open it up and save a file, right? I don't know what you mean when you say Microsoft Office. Nobody really cares anyway for any position, especially though for technical positions. Of course you know how to use Microsoft Office. So cut the fluffy stuff. It also extends to things really soft things you have good, interpersonal skills, strong communication skills. Yeah, anyone can claim that, right? It's kind of like someone saying on their online dating profile that they're really funny. Yeah, well, everybody says that they are. So cut that fluffy stuff. If you want to show communication skills, show that you taught, show that you TA'd, show it in a quantified way. Otherwise, your saying it doesn't really mean much. And the last thing is no objectives and no summaries. Well, no summary because if you only have a 1-page resume, it already is a summary. You don't need to take up that extra space in most cases. And then objectives are also pretty useless. They kind of just say what position you're looking for, which the company already knows because you applied for that position. Yeah. It's not, you don't have to. You can. It depends. At some point, if it's a 20-person team, it's kind of dishonest to say that it's just you. If it's a couple-person team, you can some people will argue to list as a team because they think it shows like teamwork skills. I don't personally care that much. If it's a mix of like team and independent projects, it might be good to list that what was team, what was independent, because that allows you to show these other things as being independent. You did all of them by yourself.
Would you list peer-reviewed publications as a project?
You can do whatever you want with your resume, right? However, whatever organization makes sense for you, do it that way. So if you have a lot of publications, you might have a publication section. And publications is one of those times when it's sort of okay to go into 2 pages if it's because of publications, because frankly, most people don't look that much at your publications anyway, so they don't really distract the reading. But yeah, do whatever makes sense for you. People are not that rigid on the structure, just so there's some structured. It's important to have a good structure because it makes it easier for me to jump and find, I get a lot of resumes where I'm flipping back and forth through 3 or 4 pages to try to find where this person went to school. That's where you have real problems. There's a publication section. If you have a bunch of awards, list an awards section, or you can all lump sometimes when I'm reviewing people's resumes, I'll lump awards into technical skills, just so I don't have to take up extra space with an awards section. So I'll do they only have 1 award. I'll just lump it in technical skills. Whatever organization works for you, do that. Yeah. Yeah, if you're running a startup, probably want that on your resume. There are 2 different ways you can do that. You can list it as a project. Personally, I'd say if it's a company, as in particularly if you have incorporated, you've done anything where you can legitimately claim without it being if you spend a weekend building an app and you haven't done anything with it at all and you're not going to work on it again, listing at a company is a little bit weird. But if it's anything where you can legitimately claim it's a company, then I would say list it under employment and list yourself as founder and CEO. That's the sort of thing that looks fantastic. What I'd say is the perfect resume for any company is you have if you have some big name company on your resume, plus you're running your own startup, you've done anything. And that's true for any company. Even the biggest companies which you think are least entrepreneurial, I'm not going to call them out here, but they love to see entrepreneurial things. Everybody loves to see it. So yeah, absolutely list it. List anything on your resume that helps you. Don't worry so much about whether or not it's appropriate for your resume. If it helps you, it should be on there. People are really lax with engineers. Extracurriculars, they can be listed different ways. I'd usually, for most people, I just say list as a bullet under education. Unless it's something that really shows leadership or entrepreneurial things, so founding something, that's when you might want to call it out more. But yeah, think through what the trade-off is. So a question like extracurriculars, depends on what else is on your resume. So if you're graduating, you have several real internships, you've done a bunch of projects, your leadership experience is not probably going to be the strongest asset for you when applying for software engineering positions. It might help more for PMs. Okay, so I'm going to go through behavioral questions. And the reason I'm doing this is a couple of things. One is, although I talked about software engineering, that doesn't really matter as much. That's kind of true. But one, interviewers are all up to their own little games. They all have their own opinions. So I'm speaking generalities, but some interviewers do care. The other thing is that a lot of people will look for PM positions or might be looking for more leadership positions down the road. And the third thing is that almost all interviews start with some sort of behavioral stuff. By behavioral, I mean questions as well. I'm also including things like, what's the hardest part of this project? So I'm lumping behavioral and experience questions together. Most interviews start with that. If you give an amazing answer to the hardest project, your interview is going to be walking into the technical questions thinking you're really smart. So they do matter from that perspective as well. So the goals in terms of behavioral and experience questions is, first of all, answer the actual question asked. Actually deliver a good answer to it. So an answer that makes you look good, not just spitting out anything that matches the question. But thirdly, to communicate well. And this is an important one because it's something that one of the key things they're looking for in some of these questions are how you communicate. And so even if you can't deliver an answer, you can't think of anything off the top of your head that really matches this question, at least you can communicate what you say well. That's the least you can do. So I'm going to talk about how to both deliver a good answer as well as some strategies for communication. So for behavioral questions or experience questions, again, I'm lumping these together, make this sort of grid here. So columns are the projects you've done. The rows are the common behavioral questions. So what did you enjoy? These are for technical positions. What did you enjoy? What did you hate? What was the most challenging, hardest bug? What did you learn? Things like that. For PM, for interviews which care more about behavioral stuff, so PM positions are common. You should do the same thing, but also do things like what were your mistakes? What were your challenges? Times when you had to influence people? Times when you had to deal with conflicts? Things like that. And so if you fill in this with each of your stories, you'll be much, much better equipped to deliver a great answer to one of these behavioral questions. And plus, if it's a phone interview, you can have this in front of you. Yeah. Yes. So when I say PM, I mean program manager or associate product manager. So the common positions for this are Microsoft and maybe Amazon's program manager position. Is Amazon? I can't remember if Amazon's program manager or a product manager. But yeah, I'm lumping program and product manager together, and associate product manager. Google's product manager position is not really generally an entry-level college position. People go instead for associate product managers. But fill this out, and this is something to remember for the rest of your life. This is how you do well in behavioral questions. This is like when I was applying to MBA programs, this is what I did for my interview. Really, really, really effective. Okay, so structures. So there are two common structures. One is nugget first, and these are sort of used in conjunction. So nugget first means to lead with sort of the thesis of your statement, of your answer. So, for example, you've asked, what accomplishment are you most proud of? I'm most proud of the way I re-architected blank. And then when you go into talking about what the problem was, how you solved it, I'm aware of what sort of the gist of what you're going to talk about is. I know the context for it, and it helps me follow along with what you're saying, particularly if you're somebody who has a thicker accent or tends to ramble. It really helps me focus on what you're going to say, but it also helps you focus. Again, this is mainly for like rambler, or especially for ramblers. It really helps you focus on what you're actually trying to talk about. The other structure is situation, action, result. There's a similar one that's also called STAR. So this means that when you're asked, tell me about a conflict with a teammate, start with what the situation is, why you had the conflict. Then you talk about what you actually did. You pulled the person aside. You talk about these issues, blah, blah, blah. What the particular actions you did, and then the result. So, the team member was then great after that, and we all lived happily ever after. Whatever it is. So situation, action, result. And these things are often used, not always, but often used in conjunction with each other. So you start with the nugget, and then you go into situation, action, result. Again, this applies to both sort of the more technical, like what was the hardest bug you had to solve, as well as very behavioral things. So like, tell me about a time you had to influence a team. Okay, so that's all the soft, gushy stuff. Okay, now to technical stuff. So first of all, how to study. This is one thing a lot of people waste their time with. Complex algorithms are generally not necessary. So a lot of people will you guys know the big CLRS, massive algorithms book, or any algorithms book this applies to? Fantastic way to learn computer science, fantastic way to get better, be a better programmer, be a better computer scientist, be a better software engineer. It's generally overkill for your interviews. And the reason why is that your interviewers, let's say average 5 years out of school, sometimes less than that, sometimes just out of school, but average probably 5, maybe 3, 4 years out of school. They don't remember this stuff. I study this stuff every day, essentially, by looking at interview questions. I cannot tell you anymore what Dijkstra's algorithm is. I have some vague idea of what it is. I would never ask an interview question, because I'm not going and reading CLRS every day. Right? I have better things to do with my time. So it happens. Sometimes you get a weird interviewer who asks this, but your interviewer generally doesn't remember these really complex algorithms. And even if they did, it would be kind of a silly question, because they want to know They want to know so that your aptitude and not your knowledge. If I ask you about Dijkstra's algorithm, I'm just testing your knowledge. I'm not really testing your intelligence. I'm not really testing your coding skills. I'm just testing how much you remember some like random algorithm that you probably haven't used. So I mean, they're generally not necessary. Good thing to do is look at the questions on Career Cup, scan through them. If you see that there's parts of knowledge that you're really missing in order to solve these questions, then go read about them by all means. For most people, there's probably very little knowledge you need to know. You might need to remember some things about what abstract classes are and that kind of stuff, but it's usually pretty basic knowledge about how to insert stuff into binary search tree, how to remove stuff, how do you very, very basic manipulations on data structures, which by your second or third year in school you probably have down pretty well. But read the questions on Career Cup. Don't listen to me. Read them and see what you think you need to know. The other thing is practice solving questions. Don't. I know a lot of you guys have my book. Don't go and read the question, read the answer. There are thousands of questions out there. You might get a question from the book, but most of your questions will hopefully not be from the book. So don't memorize the solutions. Actually, really, really practice the questions. And really, really push yourself. So yeah, you read the question. Yeah, you can't figure out the answer immediately. Don't go and read the answer then. You're not going to get that in an interview, and what you need to do is train yourself to how to brainstorm solutions, how to work your way through. So really push yourself. And the last thing here is write code on paper, not in a computer. So I had a coworker at Google, and by the way, I think this is a terrible question, but he would ask people this is just to people who claim to be really, really good at C++. He would ask them to write just hello world. And very, very, very few people could actually write hello world correctly. These are people who claim to be great at C++. And the reason is there's just a lot you forget. It's how many times have you guys actually written hello world from scratch, including typing up all the includes and whatever. I don't know when the last time I've done that is. So you forget a lot. Write code on paper so that you get away from the code completion, all this other stuff, and so that you learn how to organize code on paper instead of on a computer. You're not going to, generally speaking, in interviews, you're not going to get a computer. Phone screens, you'll often get a document, like a shared document. Still, you won't have a compile, you won't have all these other things. So write code on paper and test it on paper too. So you write the code, then need to test it by hand, just like you would in an interview. Okay, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Data structures, these are the common data structures. Again, I have this online, so I'm not going to read off all of these. Know how to implement them and know when to use them. So think about pros and cons. Hash tables are probably the most important one of these. They come up in tons and tons of interview questions. Algorithms, know implementation, how these things are implemented, and also know the time and the space complexity. A lot of people forget about space complexity. And remember that when you're dealing with information the size of what Google or Amazon or Facebook has to deal with, if you could come up with an algorithm that's log n time, but n squared space, and n's the number of files on the internet, that's not really doing a whole lot of good, right? So think about the space complexity. Most important ones here are tree, insert, and find, and depth first search. You guys probably know tree, insert, and find pretty well. Brush up on, remember how to do depth first search. Also look at breadth first search. You probably remember what it is, but a lot of people forget how to implement it, and it's actually not a trivial algorithm to remember the implementation of. Okay. So then concepts, these are the basic list of concepts. The most important ones, scalability questions. If you're dealing with any web-based company or any team at a web-based company, so Microsoft Bing, this would probably be pretty important. Know about scalability, recursion. Obviously, you guys probably all know what recursion is, but don't forget about the space complexity of recursion. Something goes to n levels on the stack that's O in space, so don't forget about that. And then bit manipulation. A lot of people get really uncomfortable with this, particularly if you've worked a ton in Java or Python. But all languages have bits. So if you're not comfortable with bits, practice it on hand. By hand, practice doing some coding with bit manipulation. It's commonly asked and throws off a lot of people. Okay. So now the really, really technical stuff. Slightly less technical. So there's sort of three types of, I already talked about behavioral questions. So there's sort of three types of questions you'll probably come across. The first two are product design and estimation questions. These are really common for PM and APM interviews. So Microsoft PM and Google APM. And then the last one is software engineering questions, which obviously is what, if you're applying for software engineering roles, that's what the base of your interview will be. Sometimes product design comes up. Very rarely do estimation questions come up for software engineering interviews. It can happen, but and likewise for PM and APM roles, particularly PM roles at Microsoft, basic coding and algorithms questions are often asked. Not all the time, but it's not unusual either. So I'm going to cover these kind of questions. So remember with all of these, particularly the first two, to remember what I said, what interviewers are looking for, which is communication skills, analytical skills, coding skills, that kind of stuff. But communication skills, passion for technology, ability to understand the user. So think about that context and what I'm talking about, and in your actual interview. So product design questions are about communication and fundamentally about communication and understanding the user. So they're very, very common are things like how would you design blank for the blind, or it might be, how would you improve this product, or even something like you're given, $1 million to renovate Bill Gates' bathroom. What would you do? Those are all sort of product design questions. Again, it's about communication, so structured communication, ability to understand the user, as well as creativity and sort of business skills and instincts. But the first two is what you can really sort of nail in your interview. So general approach is, first of all, ask a lot of questions. A lot of questions. So if you're asked to, say, design a pen, well, if you go and sit down and start saying, oh, I'd make the pen like this and have this and this and this and this, the problem is you don't know what the pen is. It could be a pen for children who are using it to write on clothing that needs to be washed off, or it could be a pen for astronauts. And so you need to ask a lot of questions to really understand who the user is. So ask questions, resolve ambiguity, understand what the user wants, find a way to structure your thinking, and then actually go and solve it. So let's take a question like design a calculator for the blind. So you need to know in this thing, yeah, I've told you it's blind people, but is it blind children or adults? Is it accountants who are blind? Is it, there are a lot of different answers for this. So yeah, I've told you the user is blind, but it's much broader than that. And I told you that, suppose I tell you it's for blind children. Well, where are they using it? Using it at school, at home? Where are they, what are they doing with this? And then next, you want to understand the user. So remember that, okay, so I told you it's blind children. Well, is really the user blind children? Or is it blind children plus their teachers who may or may not be blind, plus their parents who may or may not be blind? So remember that the user is not always who the interviewer, there's often more users than what the interviewer actually told you. So then you have to think about what is important to the blind children. So, and discuss with the interviewer. So, well, it's important to keep up with the rest of the class. You want to think about these sort of things. To not feel different, there's emotional needs. So think about what the user's needs are. And then you want to find a way of structuring the problem. And you want to do this because otherwise you're just going to go off shouting all over, talking about a million different features you could do. It's really disorganized. I don't really know where you're going with what you're saying. So find a structure. So one structure here is, well, okay, I'm going to start with making a list of all the necessary features and the necessary functions. So the arithmetic functions, and mathematical functions that are necessary also need to handle input and output. So I'm going to discuss that next. And then I'm going to start talking about how to sort of design the usability for the blind. And then I'm going to, for the non-blind, for their parents and teachers. And then finally I'm going to wrap up a sort of summary of what the calculator will look like. So that's a structure. So it's important to find a structure for the problem. And then you solve it with that. So that's product design. The next common question, these are super, super popular at Google these don't come up for software engineers. Very, very common at APM interviews. And also come up at Microsoft PM interviews. So estimation questions they're not about the number, you just need to think about them as any sort of problem-solving question. It is a problem-solving question. So they're doing problem solving, so intelligence, things like that, as well as they're also testing quantitative skills. And the ability to, ballpark numbers, things like that. Deduction, all that. So the way you approach, first of all, ask questions. The interviewer may have left things intentionally ambiguous. Interviewers do this often. They want to see if you make assumptions or if you clarify things. So they might leave things intentionally ambiguous, or they just might have not have clarified some things. So outline and structure your approach. Break down the components, and then do a sanity check. So if you're asked how much money does Google make in ads, or Gmail make in ads each year, you want to know, is this US or is this everywhere? Is this profit, or are we talking profit or revenue? Are we talking about the past year, so what they made in 2011, or are we talking about what they made on average over all the years? And are we talking about Gmail only, or are we also talking about people who use hosted Gmail? So when you have Google apps for your domain. So you want to ask a lot of these questions. Then outline your approach. Okay, so I'm going to start off with, I'm going to figure out first the number of users for, say, if it's just US Gmail users. And then I'm going to outline the number of clicks, figure out the number of clicks per year on average. And then I'll finally go in and, the third step, and figure out the amount of money per click. So you outline this approach to your interview, you do this explicitly. I would actually recommend writing down notes as you do this. So actually clearly write down step 1, step 2, step 3. So then you then follow each of the steps. So if you want to know the number of Gmail users in the US, you can start off with, well, okay, there are 300 million people roughly in the US. Well, you want to exclude people probably under 12 and over 60, assume average life expectancy of 75, exclude people 65, 75. Reduce the number of sort of email users. And then assume 80% of those people you actually use email. Say 80% of those have a non-work account. Okay, what percentage of people would you estimate use Gmail instead of, say, Hotmail or Yahoo? So you deduce it this way. And finally, you get a number. And you then do this for each of those steps. And the last thing is, okay, suppose you get something like the US revenue for Gmail is $5 billion. Well, is this right? So you want to sanity check this. And if you know these numbers, there's a couple different ways you can kind of try a sanity check. One is, well, Google's revenue is $40 billion. $5 billion of that being from Gmail is probably a little bit high, given how much people are using search and everything else. The other way you can look at it is, that would be $16 per US citizen. Again, we're talking about Gmail users in the US, which is pretty crazy for it to be that high. So you know that's probably wrong. So that's what you do. You just think about this as any sort of problem-solving question. Okay. So now the technical questions. So technical questions. Ask questions. Talk out loud. It's a problem-solving thing. Show that your interviewer how you think. Think critically. When you're brainstorming an algorithm, think through, does your algorithm really, really work? Does it have other side effects? Code slowly, methodically. Sometimes people will try to race through interviews, race through the coding. I have only once seen someone actually get rejected because they wrote code too slowly. People will get rejected because they stumbled through the code and made too many mistakes. I've only once seen someone actually get rejected for coding too slowly. And it was I interviewed this woman, and it was really, really, really extreme. It was she took 40 minutes to write a for loop. It was pretty absurd. And there was a debate even over her about whether or not we actually want to reject someone for this. So just code slowly, methodically. You really don't need to race. And then test your code. And really, when you find mistakes, which you will, if you wrote code and you haven't found a mistake, it's probably because you just haven't found it. Your code probably is not flawless. Make very careful fixes, so don't rush through it. Don't try to see, oh, it returned 2 instead of 1, I'll just add a +1. That causes more problems than it solves. Usually it solves one problem and creates about 10. So think through your mistakes carefully. So good coding. Again, methodical. There's no reason to rush. Reasonably bug-free. Again, you're compared to other candidates on the same question. Nobody else is writing flawless code, really. You don't need to either. But obviously, fewer bugs, the better. Clean coding. So, if your code looks kind of massive, you have a really meaty function, show your interviewer that you understand how to modularize code, use other, define your own data structures. Show that you are a person who cares about clean coding. So now I'm going to go through these sort of 3 types of sort of coding questions, or really software engineering questions. So for this typical things that are like coding and algorithm questions, there are 4 approaches that I found work pretty well. The first one's pattern matching. So pattern matching means basically look at a problem. This is probably what you guys have probably seen before, probably already do this. Look at a problem and think about what problems are similar to this. And this is why practicing interview questions is so useful, because a lot of problems are modifications of existing things. So if you need to reverse the order of words in a sentence, well, that's a lot like reversing the number of characters in a sentence. And if you did that, you would get, in this case, you'd get, Atuk eris God. And once you do that, you're like, well, wait, I wanted to get that, and that's not that far away from the answer I ultimately wanted to get. And so if you reverse the order of all the characters in the sentence, and then reverse each individual word, you end up getting the answer. So that's what pattern matching is. You just try to look at what problems are similar. The next one is simplify and generalize. So what this is taking a problem and trying to simplify or just change some of the constraints. And this can help you sort of brainstorm a different solution. So if you want to say, suppose you have, this is a classic Google question. We have a ransom note question. So you have an array of strings, and which sort of represent a magazine. You're cutting out words out of the magazine to build the ransom note. One way of simplifying this is, well, instead of cutting words out of a magazine, you're cutting characters out of a magazine. How would you solve that? Ideas? So you're cutting characters out of a magazine. How would you do this? Exactly. So you can count characters using a hash table is one way of looking at it, or just a simple array. Yes, so you build an array of character frequencies and then basically see if they match up. Do you have enough characters to build the ransom note? So if you want to extend this to words, well, it's pretty easy. Now you just, instead of mapping from like a character to its frequency, use a hash table to map from a word to its frequency. So getting back to the middle part here. So somewhat off topic, but what size is that array? How long would it be? What? I heard someone say something? 26. What? Right. So how big what is?
How big the ransom note is? How big the magazine?
You don't actually need to know how big the ransom note magazine is, because it's character frequencies. Is it 26? Right. So a simple answer is 26. I once got 24 from an American candidate. So that was weird. But yeah, so the simple answer that people give is 26, and that's actually incorrect. You're making a lot of assumptions there. You're making an assumption, first of all, that like we don't care about capitalization. You're making an assumption we don't care about punctuation. You're also making an assumption that this is English, and that we don't care about accent, the characters, and all these other things. Whenever you're assuming that something is just be careful about assuming that anything is the English alphabet or ASCII. It's a very good way to set yourself apart from other candidates is to not make that assumption. So just remember that. Okay. Next approach is base case and build. And this is really, really popular, particularly for things, the more you do interview questions, the easier it'll be to kind of identify these things. So base case and build means it's sort of based on the sort of induction. So solve it for, n equals 1, and then maybe n equals 2, and then see if you can build n equals 3 based on the prior results. So if you want to print all subsets of a set, so the answer for just the empty set is actually not the empty set, it's a set containing the empty set. For just the set A, it's the empty set in A, for all the subsets. For A and B, it's empty set A, B, and A and B. So now I suppose we want to know all the subsets of A, B, and C. How could you build on the prior answers to get this one?
Find all find all these subsets of that, and then A and C find all the subsets of that.
So that's one approach. So I used to ask this question, and I stopped because that approach actually, it's really, really logical. It doesn't work, it turns out. And the reason why is that you get a lot of duplicate sets, and the set starts increasing a lot faster than you have to like rule out a whole bunch of duplicates. There's another approach though. Exactly. So you basically so if you want to know A, B, and C, you basically take the subsets of A and B, clone them, and then add C to all the clones. So build S of n by cloning S of n minus 1 and adding the last element to the clone sets. So that's basic case and build. And once you get this, it's a really easy recursion algorithm, a fairly easy recursion algorithm to write. Okay, the last one is data structure brainstorm. And this is the sort of cheating approach. It's kind of hacky. I put it up here because it actually unfortunately works. And the reason why it works is a lot of times interview questions are really hard until it occurs to you to use a particular data structure. And that's why data structure brainstorm can often work. So this used to be one of my favorite Google questions. So you have basically 10 digit phone numbers, and you want to be able to do two different operations efficiently. First, you want to be able to, you're kind of like the guy at the phone company controlling which ones are taken, which one aren't. You want to be able to do two operations efficiently. One, you want to be able to handle the situation when someone walks in and says, I would like 206-555-1212. You want to be able to say, this is taken or it's not. And also mark it's taken. And you also want to be able to handle the situation when someone just comes in and says, hey, I need a new phone number. Give me anyone you got. So you go through this, and you might first come up with a sorted array to handle the basically mapping of numbers to availability. So basically into a bool map. And the problem is it's a little bit, if you use just an array of all the available numbers, it's slow to remove numbers from it because you have to shift everything over. You can use a linked list, but then it's slow to find a particular number in it. You can use a hash table, and this is what a lot of people try to use. The problem is there isn't really a good way of saying, like, give me a random one in there from the numbers which have a particular value. You can't really do that. So hash tables don't actually work for this problem. But as soon as it occurs to you to use a tree, it's like, oh, of course, right? You have a tree of all the available numbers. You want to select any available number from there? Sure, pick the root, pick a leaf, doesn't matter. You want to find a particular number? Hey, it's a binary search tree. You can find it log n time. This is one of the problems. This is why I stopped using this problem, because I don't like things where this approach works. But it's just, once it occurs to use a tree, it's easy. But it's a really hard problem until it crosses your mind that trees actually exist. So that's data structure brainstorm. Go through all the data structures. Don't forget about heaps. Heaps are one of those things when all other things fail and you can't solve this question. Oftentimes heaps is the one that just didn't cross your mind to use. Okay, so those are the 4 approaches. Okay, so next one that is very, very common, the other type of question that's very, very popular is object-oriented design. Sorry to all the Amazon people in here, but these are very popular at Amazon. If you're interviewing with Amazon, phone screens as well as on-site interviews, make sure you think about object-oriented design. Very popular. So the way you do this, good approach is, and this, for some people these questions are really easy, other people have a lot of trouble with them. A good approach though is, if you're someone who struggles with this, is first ask some questions, figure out, make sure you understand the problem, make sure the interviewer wasn't making assumptions that you didn't know about. So ask some questions to sort of resolve whatever ambiguity there is. Then sort of think about what the core objects are. Then figure out how they're related to each other. And then think about the actual actions that might be taken. So I'll show this with an example. If you want to know the data structures for a restaurant, first, ask things like, is it a chain restaurant or is it a single one? Is it like a restaurant which takes reservations? Are you handling reservations? Is it like a restaurant that you walk up and you order at the counter? Does it have waiter service? You want to ask a lot of these questions. They're pretty important. You can't really do the object-oriented design until you know these answers. Then you kind of figure out what the core objects are. So Again, for some people this is like very instinctive, but it's like guest, party, table, server, host, that kind of thing. And then figure out how they're related to each other. So server and host are both employees. So you're going to need an employee class. A guest is a member of a party, so you're probably going to have some sort of array inside party which represents all the guests, something like that. You might have a mapping of guests back to party, something like that. And then you actually walk through the actions. And this is where sort of you come up with, figure out if your object-oriented design actually worked well. You might come across objects that you'd sort of forgotten about. So, a party is seated at a table. Well, how did they get seated? Oh, a host. Maybe you forgot to list host earlier. So you walk through these actions, and these will make you realize, hopefully if you missed objects, it'll also, maybe there's something that's going to be really problematic, like how do you find if a table is available? Well, your object-oriented design is going to be able to represent that somehow. Some sort of way of knowing what tables are available. Okay. The last type of question is system design. These questions scare the heck out of some people. You don't need to know, just think about this as any other type of problem solving or algorithm question. You do not need to know distributed systems to solve these. In fact, distributed systems are actually pretty irrelevant. They're not really that hard. They're just like any other problem solving question. So first, handle ambiguity. Next, figure out what your algorithm would be if scalability were an issue. Like if everything could fit on one computer and everything was just like magically and you had no problems like that. Kind of get the feeling of how this algorithm would work on a very simple case. Then go back to the actual problem. Figure out, okay, now you have your algorithm, it works for a simple case. What do you do when there's tons of data? And there's tons of computers and there's all these other issues. And then you actually go through and figure out what the problems are that were created when you go across multiple computers. So a simple case is, or one common problem is you have millions of documents and you want to find all documents which contain a list of words. So one thing that's ambiguous here is if it needs to be an exact query. So like if I search, since I'm building a search engine, if I search dog chased cat, are you looking for that exact string or are you looking for any document that contains all of those words? Other things that are ambiguous, you need to return a sort of sorted list of documents or whatever. So ask some questions, make sure you understand what the problem is so you don't run off on a tangent and realize you're solving the wrong problem. Then sort of just figure this out for assuming everything can fit on one machine. So if this were one machine, I'd probably do something simple like assuming order doesn't matter, and I'd break up each document to individual words. So each thing is a list of, each document is now just represented by an array of strings. I'd probably create a hash table that then mapped from each word to all the documents it contains. So mapping, dog appears in documents 1, 5, 10. And then to do a little search, finding everything that contains dog chased cat, I basically take the set of documents that contains dog, take the set of documents that contains chase, take the set of documents that contains cat, and intersect them. So basic algorithm. Okay, but now I have tons of data, and I can't fit all this in one machine. You might actually want to estimate how many documents there are. Take an average size for a document, figure out how many computers there are going to be. Figure out, will your hash table actually fit on one machine? Because it might not. So let's assume it doesn't. Well, okay, how do we split up this hash table? You're going to need to solve these questions. So how do you split up a hash table across multiple machines? What do you do when the data size grows? So you need to solve all these problems. So make a list of what the problems are you think you've created, and then figure out how do you solve them. Again, this does not take any special knowledge to solve. You don't really need to know about MapReduce. And if you know, that's great, but it's generally not relevant. You don't need to know any special stuff. It's just problem solving. Anyone can do this, including, once you finish your first year and you understand hash tables, you have all the knowledge you need to actually solve this question. Okay. So that's sort of the list of everything. So a lot of people kind of freak out, so I want to just reiterate this. You do not need to know everything. You don't need to get all the questions perfectly right. You only need to do better than other candidates. Evaluation is completely relative. I've never said somebody has to get a sort of has to get fewer than some number of mistakes on all the questions. It's completely relative, which is why a lot of times on feedback, when you ask the first question, you'll have people, when an interviewer first asks an interview question, they write in their feedback like, well, I think they did well, but I'm not calibrated on this question. Someone has to always be the first question. So evaluation is completely relative. So just remember that when you walk into the interview, it's really not about how you did. It's about how you did relative to other people. And relax. Everybody's making mistakes on interviews. I have seen, if I include hiring committee, I have seen one candidate who ever had a flawless interview, meaning like really just like didn't make any mistakes, and he was like freakishly smart, and in Russia, and he basically got an offer on the spot. He was like, we're on like interview. I was not actually supposed to interview him. We had like 10 interviewers in Russia, like to set up the Russian office and Google, and I was like pulled into the interview because I felt bad like sending he'd like exhausted the first like 5 interviewers all of the questions that those interviewers knew, and then I was like pulled in because I was available, and they're like, we need to just like waste this guy's time more. It's the only person I've ever seen had a flawless interview. Very, very few questions, very, very few candidates even had a flawless interview on like just my questions. My questions were like probably on the slightly harder side, but I was not the hardest interviewer. Everybody makes mistakes. If you think you didn't make any mistakes, you really, really did. I promise you. So don't get too shaken up by it. Everybody else made mistakes too. So some final thoughts. First of all, I don't know where people got this idea from, but it's completely wrong. If your recruiter does not respond after your interview, it does not mean you're rejected. Like, companies have no reason to not tell you if they're rejecting you. They will tell you. Now, just like you may not respond to all emails promptly, your recruiter may get distracted, busy, whatever, but not getting a response does not mean that you're rejected. It may actually be because your team you interviewed with is getting reorged, or maybe actually that you're getting an offer and they actually just need some time to get together some paperwork. It can mean anything. I've seen no correlation with like the delay in responding to whether or not you get an offer. So if you don't hear back, usually I say follow up the recruiter. Sending a thank you note to the recruiter right after the interview is always nice. You don't really need to send it to your interviewers, but your recruiter is always a good person to say give a quick thank you to. They have to put up a lot of angry candidates, so a nice thank you will go a long ways. But follow up with your recruiter after about a week if you haven't heard back. And after that, every couple days is probably okay. If it's been like 2 or 3 emails, probably a good time to start getting on the phone. But don't assume anything just because they didn't respond to you. Again, I've said this a million times, but people don't believe me. You really don't know how well you did or how poorly. You could have done great, you could have done poorly. You have no way of knowing. And the last thing is there's a lot of randomness in interviews. So, I'll see people who, I see a ton of people who got an offer from Google, not Amazon, or Amazon, not Google. There's no real reason why someone should get an offer from one company versus the other. It's just randomness. I'll see people who got rejected from Google, and then I'm on the exact same hiring committee a year later, and then they get an offer. There's randomness in interviews. There's randomness in like how group decisions get made. I mean, you guys have probably all been in groups where people are arguing about something, and like the strongest advocate gets their way. Like, same thing, unfortunately, happens with interview decisions, right? The strongest advocate, or the person who's like has the strongest voice, kind of leads decisions. A lot of things can happen. It's very, very random, unfortunately. If you don't get an offer, just apply again. Usually, companies have a 6 months to a year waiting list or timeline to wait. Try again. A lot of times, in fact, I didn't get an offer from Google when I applied for an internship. Ended up going to Apple instead. And then next year I reached out to the recruiter. I was like, hey, I'm still interested in Google. And they because I did well enough, I didn't get an offer, but because I did well enough in my internship interview, they just flew me out without a phone screen. So not getting an offer can mean you're in the top 15%. Not that there's quick real percentiles, but top 15%, but not that little edge. And you might get expedited the next year because you actually did really well, though you didn't get an offer. There's a lot of randomness. Just try again later on. So I'm selling both my books today. So I talked about what both of them are: cracking coding interviews, software engineering interviews, basically. Google Resume is a more comprehensive resume cover letter, what you should be doing, college guide. Selling, assuming the internet works, I do take credit cards, but it's depending on the internet signal. Cracking coding interviews 40, Google Resume is 20. which is actually a little bit roughly about what their list price is. Check out ClearCup just to talk about these things because they are actually pretty useful. I actually take down products so I found they weren't useful for people. If you guys haven't done interviews before, watch an interview. ClearCup has a bunch of interview videos. Watch one of them if you haven't done technical interviews before, so you know what to expect. We also have an iPhone app, resume review, mock interviews, all that kind of stuff. And that's it. I'm happy to take questions and sell some books. These are all signed, I think. I can also add your name to them. Oh, you guys want to grab the books? Dress code, everybody in here, I think, would look fine for an interview for dev positions. Dev positions at big companies or startup, for elite tech companies or startups. Banks, I would wear a suit, even for a tech position. Try to wear a suit or something nice. But yeah, I mean, just what I'm wearing is fine. Jeans, a nice top, totally fine. Even t-shirts would be fine, but you know, no reason to not wear a nicer shirt. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. They have more important things to judge.
All right. I applied to a job once, and before getting an interview, they gave me a pre-screening aptitude test. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering what would be the best strategy to solve it. They gave me 40 minutes to implement a poker game, basically. And based on your presentation, there's algorithms, object-oriented, system design, and you can't, finish it all in 40 minutes. So I was wondering what would be the best way to convey.
I would probably, in that kind of situation, I would probably focus first and foremost on the object-oriented design. So get the object-oriented design and the outline there. One of the things that they're doing there is they're looking at, they have a lot of other ways of testing your intelligence later on. One of the big things that they're probably going to be looking at is how your code, if it runs, first of all, if it works, assuming that it's a system which can test that. But object-oriented design is going to be a big thing. So writing good, clean code.
It was also by hand.
Oh, it was, okay, yeah. So that helps, yeah. So sketch out the object-oriented design, do that first and foremost, and then fill in what are sort of like the meaty parts of the algorithm.
Thanks.
I'm always flabbergasted when they say, do you have any questions for us? Like, I want to come up with a witty, like a question or something that will show that I'm thinking about the position well.
Okay, so I kind of skipped over that part of time. But for questions for the interviewer, you can think about it two different ways. One, you should prepare questions in advance because everyone's going to ask you for questions. You don't want to say you have none. You can repeat questions if you have to, but I think, so I separate them two things. Things you actually want to know and that are really useful information for you to know, and then things that kind of make you look good because you're asking them. The thing that makes you look good are things about asking about their technology, ask about how they implement things, ask about why they made certain design decisions, meaning like technical design decisions, so why'd you use this protocol over this other one? That's the sort of stuff which you're probably going to want to prepare for. If all else fails, you can probably ask them to talk to you about the architecture of the system. Things that I think are really valuable to know for software engineering positions especially are things like how many meetings do you have per week? How do you spend your typical day? I think the probably most important thing that I personally want to know for a software engineering position is how decisions get made. So, walking through typical decisions, who's leading them? What I personally am looking for is I want to look for positions where devs are leading the decisions. But not everybody cares about that. So I think those are great questions to ask.
Thanks.
If we're applying for the types of positions where we're doing like web development and programming, but also like UI design and graphic design and stuff, should we be integrating like visual design into our resume as long as it's still clear and readable, or should we keep that separate in like a portfolio?
So almost every time I've seen someone do a sort of very graphic, visually designed resume, it's often really taking away from the content. Definitely create something like, if you create something that's like disorganized and like I think the resume I had up there would be fine. If you're applying for a graphic design position, that's when your resume actually becomes its own portfolio. So there I might emphasize it more, but just be careful. If programming is a core component, be careful that what you're doing with your resume isn't taking away from actually showing technical skills. Because usually they do. Like when you see like people like tweeting around like amazing resume templates, they're like almost always these like things that are like really cool and graphic, and then you're like, wait, you were able to include the equivalent of like a quarter of a page of content, which is what they usually are. Not always, but so yeah. I mean, make it clean, organized, well structured. if you're going to be coding, make sure that the graphicness of your resume isn't taking away from that. But also, this is actually true for everybody. Create a website, put up a portfolio, including for dev positions, portfolios of like projects you've done, and an HTML resume. But especially true for any sort of design position.
If you have a shot at an interview or an application, but you think that you don't have a good enough of a CV right now, and that you would probably make a lot or a reasonable improvement on your accomplishments in the next year, should you still give it a shot now, or should you wait?
So I separate, particularly for big companies, I pretty much separate what you do to get an interview to what you do to do well in an interview. So once you have the interview, once you're in the interview, like, the prior experience generally is not a key factor. So if you don't think your CV is good enough, but you got an interview somehow, go for it. Worst case, you get rejected and whatever, you can still reapply in a year. Companies are particularly forgiving of people like, they interviewed as a sophomore, didn't do well. Well, it's harder as a sophomore. Companies are very forgiving of letting you reapply the next year. So yeah, take the chance. Always take the chance.
Given what we're talking in university, are cover letters actually useful?
I've seen some good cover letters. Some companies require them. They generally aren't very important for dev positions. But anytime you are reaching out to a recruiter or someone unemployed looking for a job, what you're emailing them is your cover letter. So think about the cover letter as the email you write to them expressing interest in a job. There are some fantastic cover letters out there. It's hard to write a really, really fantastic one. If you go to my blog, which is technologywoman.com, I do have an example, a link to one really, really amazing one. It's very, very hard to write one that good. I would just focus personally writing one that's good enough, that expresses your interest, why you're interested in the position, and really highlights how your skills relate to the position with specific accomplishments. If you can write one that's good enough, it's probably as good as you're gonna do.
Thanks.
Hi. Once that you go through the filter of the whole phone screening process and that you actually land in the on-site day-long interview, what are your odds usually in the process at this time?
Depends on the company. So one thing I'll add on to that is that generally your phone screen performance does not really impact your on-site. So generally the people don't look at your phone screen performance. Generally phone screens, the bar can be absolutely the same as the on-site interview, but generally your performance won't be factored in when it comes to the ultimate decision. Just a little side note there. At Google, I would say it was 1 in 20, 1 in 10 maybe. Google's probably had a higher bar. However you look at why this happened, Google has probably had a lower percentage of people who actually got offers. It was 1 in 10. Microsoft, I think it's more like 1 in 5. Someone at Amazon might be able to tell me what theirs is, but there's just kind of rough numbers. It depends on the team and a lot of other things, but in that ballpark.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
As a recruiter, how would you compare two students, one who has kind of significant student leadership and work experience, but not the best marks, versus someone who has a straight A average, but not a lot of leadership experience and isn't as entrepreneurial?
I would take the one who, I don't care that much about grades. Grades are one way of showing achievement. There are many other ways of showing achievement. My office mate at Google had a 2.2 GPA. Now, granted, he was also the head of, or the lead, whatever they're called, the person who runs games, which is now called Pigeon. But he had a 2.2 GPA. And Google is one of the snootiest about GPA. I don't care much about GPA. A lot of people don't. But some people will use it because it's a quick filter. The quick answer is, I'd probably look at both of them. The guy with the great GPA, the girl with the great GPA is probably pretty smart and hard worker, even if they don't have these other things, so I'd probably interview both. But if I had to pick one, I'd take the one with the low GPA but has these other accomplishments.
Hi. Is there a general good period of the year to apply for?
A good period
in the year.
mean, internships, people tend to look January, February-ish. Full-time, you can really apply for the big companies, you can really apply any time because they are always looking for people. Even in like the worst recession, they were always looking for people. For full-time position doesn't really matter, but you know, mostly college recruiting or university recruiting happens like September through, for like kind of the first semester of school, so September through December. But a lot of people get offers later on. They're always hiring.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, last time I gave a Microsoft interview over phone. They asked me I talk about project. They asked me the name of the course, which I absolutely didn't remember on that time, and they were waiting on the phone for me to answer that. In that situation, what should I do?
I would sort of say, I mean, that's weird. It was the person from your school.
No, it wasn't.
That's weird. I've never heard that happen before. I always kind of say, I think it was called. I wouldn't distract the interview with looking it up. I would say, I think it was our distributed systems class. I can't remember the exact title of it. You can throw out, I can look it up if you want. Leave it up to the interviewer to ask, but I wouldn't waste time on the interview looking it up.
Thank you.
Hi, this goes back to your don't use graphic resumes unless you're a graphic designer kind of comment. So at one point in time, I wrote this program where I had an array of words, and then I wrote a bunch of functions that were really expressive that just went and assembled those words in really creative ways to generate what would be my resume. And at the time, I thought that I should basically print out that program and hand that in as my resume. What do you think about that?
Again, it probably distracts from your actual accomplishments. Now, you can get people who are going to think that's unique. If you really wanted, you could if you were at like a career fair and you really thought that what you did was really cool and exceptional, you could create sort of two versions of your resume and staple them together. Would be one option. I think it kind of violates the two-page resume rule, but people just won't look at one if they don't care about it. But yeah, I mean, generally the very graphic, neat things are a distraction from accomplishments. Or they emphasize, in that case, it's like, okay, they emphasize that you built this really cool program, but what about everything else you've done?
Thank you.
Sorry. All else equal, are computer scientists and software engineers considered the same for these companies?
In the U.S., we don't really have that separation. Like, I've never met anyone in the U.S. who had a software engineering degree. U.S. just calls it all computer science.
Okay.
So I can't really speak to that. I would guess they're more or less equal, but I can't say for sure because I've never seen the software engineering degree in the U.S.
But I mean, if you get like a candidate from Canada and he has software engineer and you have the same candidate, someone really similar that's computer science, for you, it's the same?
I don't know. Maybe one of the actual recruiters in here or Amazon people in here could tell me. But I don't know because I don't know what the difference is in Canada.
All right.
I suspect that computer science is probably more research focused, in which case I could lean towards the software engineer over the computer scientist because software engineer may have more coding skills. I mean, what I want to see is coding skills and intelligence. So I don't know the difference between the two degrees really. Computer science could be too research focused and not enough coding, in which case I might lead to software engineer. On the other hand, if software engineering is a less prestigious thing that tends to attract less smart people, maybe I'd lean the other way. But I don't actually know what the difference is. So.
Okay, thanks.
They say we're out of time. But you can find me. I'll be around.